As we get ready to start here, I can go ahead and do a couple of introductions for our webinar this morning. My name is Kyle Hawk. I'm the Director of Content at MakeMyMove. And I'm joined this morning by Mike Rutz, the CEO of MakeMyMove. We're going to be talking about the opportunity around remote employees specifically, and what it looks like to build an incentive package that can attract remote employees to your community. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation here. You'll notice, and I'm sure you're all familiar with, but there's a button that you can actually submit questions, the Q&A button. Feel free to drop questions in there at any time during the presentation. And once we get to the end, we'll kind of start working through all of those questions. But as we get started here, I'm going to pass it over to Mike to kind of tee us up this morning. Mike, good morning.
Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for showing up and spending a little bit of time with us this morning. We're going to talk very specifically about incentives and whether or not they really work. And one of the reasons why we put this webinar together, we do a lot of work with communities and those communities that are working to attract remote workers and workforce in general. And we also do a lot of work with those candidates and those folks that are interested in relocating and moving. So we have a very good understanding of kind of both sides of the marketplace and what actually makes them move. And very often when I'm speaking to folks who are economic developers or mayors who are responsible for allocating funds and investing in a program to attract these remote workers, oftentimes they get asked by their constituents, hey, is it really worth the incentive that we're putting up? Does it really drive incremental new residents? It just comes up every time. And through our work and the research that we've done, we wanted to share with you our conclusion, which is yes, they do work, but you have to be thoughtful and deliberate about how you build the incentive. It's not just cutting a check to someone. In fact, it doesn't even have to be a cash reward. What it really is has to be something that conveys the value proposition of your community and is going to attract them and make them feel like they're a part of something that causes them to be part of your community. So we'll talk in detail about that. But first, let's just kind of set the table a little bit and talk about why MakeMyMove is so focused on helping communities recruit these individuals. So we started our company several years ago, prior to the pandemic, actually, helping communities build talent pipelines to address their workforce and population growth issue. But when the pandemic came around, we started the website MakeMyMove because we saw, number one, this huge wave of new remote workers, and we saw a wave of new communities that saw the opportunity in attracting them. So we decided to build a marketplace that enables communities to convey who they are and market themselves to an audience of individuals who are highly qualified. By virtue of just showing up at MakeMyMove, they're interested in learning about new places to live. And now that we suddenly have this huge number of free agent remote workers who are no longer tethered to a desk in an office somewhere and can live and work wherever they would like. It's a real opportunity for communities. It also can be a threat to some degree. So if we go to the next page, like I said, we work a lot with economic developers. We work a lot with mayors and community foundations and even some statewide organizations. And the reason why they've started working with us is because the old economic development play, and it's still, trust me, it's a viable play of, attracting an employer who you offer incentives to open up operations in your state or your community. And those incentives are usually attached to a certain number of jobs that are created and an investment that's made in the community. And those communities subsidize those companies with dollars or with tax credits, which that is a great play, and it certainly still works, but it's become a lot harder, primarily because we have a dynamic where we have more jobs than people. That strategy was great when we had more people than jobs, because we could use those jobs we could use those citizens to fill those jobs. Now we just don't have enough people. You can see on the chart that we have up here, the Midwest and Northeast are very much feeling, issues when it comes to population growth and workforce, and even California. So this is a national problem. And it's something that economic developers and employers are dealing with constantly. And we feel like we have something that can help us kind of capture. We're at this moment in time. The pandemic has changed the way people think about where they live, the way they think about where they work. And so it's a golden opportunity for some of these communities that are in the red to actually do something to attract population and workforce. So as I mentioned before, the pandemic, kind of changed everything. There's a major acceleration of people leaving some of these large urban communities. San Francisco is one that comes to mind right now. I was reading an article the other day that over 30% of the softwares in San Francisco have left San Francisco. Many of them have gone to suburbs, but many of them are coming back to the Midwest or the Northeast. So there's this massive migration from a lot of these coastal and urban centers. And the pandemic really just accelerated that. We did a survey over the summer, actually, of remote workers. Excuse me, a market research partner that we worked with surveyed 1,000 remote workers. And the number one reason for them leaving the urban centers was to find somewhere with a lower cost of living. A lot of these folks started to realize, if they're getting into their 30s, it's going to be very difficult for them to actually own a home. That's why affordable housing was number two. But it's just challenging, and you have to make a lot of money if you're going to live in one of those larger markets. So those were the number one and two reasons causing people to migrate out of the urban centers. And then folks that are looking for a different climate and a chance to find new people. We'll talk a little bit about the opportunity. The world changed in 2020, whether we like it or not, and remote work is here to stay. Before the pandemic, we had around 5 million remote workers in the entire country. Over the pandemic, we had over 60 million people that went remote. And we expect, based on all the data that we've seen, and then all the other research and think tanks that have done surveys and have researched this, that around 40 million people are going to stay remote. These are typically people that are knowledge workers, right? They're folks that work in finance, that work in technology, a lot of software engineers, folks that are high wage earners. They are extremely valuable to communities. Number one, because they can help diversify communities, especially some of these rural communities that are looking for folks that are high wage earners that are working in a knowledge economy. But then from an economic perspective, they're really valuable. We did some work we're located in Indianapolis. We put together a study with the Indiana University Public Policy Institute. You can stay on that back slide there, Kyle. We did some work on them and to understand what the value of a remote worker is to a community. So a new worker in Muncie, Indiana is a client of ours, and we did this analysis, and we have built a calculator where we can effectively understand with a pretty good level of precision what a new worker is worth to a community. In Muncie, Indiana, a new worker that makes $100,000 a year is worth $7,500 of new tax revenue in year one. Around 2,500 of that goes to the local, the municipal, and the county. The remainder of that goes to the state. That's just year one. But then when you look at consumer output, there's a $83,000 of new consumer output that gets created by that one individual relocating to that community. That means that their consumer spending is included in that number, and then all the consumer spending that's driven off of their consumer spending, right? That multiplying effect. And they end up creating a half of a job in that community. So they are extremely valuable. And that's just 1 year, assuming that you get people to stay for 5, 6, 7 years, these people are worth upwards of $500,000. So the investment is completely justified to attract these workers and make them part of your community. And then, as far as the profile is concerned, typically college educated, skilled, and are top earners in their field. So what really does attract remote workers? I mentioned the survey that we did. We talked about cost of living and affordable housing, but how likely are we to actually get them to move? So a couple of things. One statistic that's not on this slide, of the workers that we surveyed, over 60% of them said that they would leave their current job if they lost their remote work privileges. And when we drilled down into Gen Z, 81% of Gen Z said they would leave their job if they lost their remote work privileges. It is here to stay. Employers are going to have to adapt to the workforce, especially right now because the workforce has all the leverage because there's so much scarcity in the talent pool. Of those individuals that we surveyed, the 1,000 that we surveyed, 29% of them said they're likely to move to a new city or state in the next 18 months. Those individuals cited one of the barriers in moving was actually moving expenses. It's not a cheap activity. It's $5,000 to $10,000 typically to relocate. And 50% of those people said that they would relocate if they were given $10,000. And now here's the big and. They're not just going to move for the check. It has to be a community that has the amenities and the quality of life that they are seeking. I would actually start with that. They would move if the community has the amenities and quality of life they are seeking and they had $10,000. We should rework that slide, but that's a very, very critical point. Nonetheless, it demonstrates that incentives do work primarily because they kind of help grease the skids to help these folks afford relocation and just make it an easier pill to swallow. So we actually also survey workers who relocate to the communities who are our clients and who we work with. So we're not just getting information from the market research survey that we outsourced, but then also from the work that we do with our communities. So 60% of the people that have moved or are ready to move to a community that we work with have said that good schools and quality of life are a major reason why they want to move and why they're moving to that community. They're also seeking a better sense of community. This lends itself to some of the success we're having with the smaller communities. Greensburg, Indiana, which we'll talk about later, is an 8,000 person, tiny community located in Indiana. But they have an extraordinary amount of applicants for their program, primarily because they've been able to convey a sense of community with the incentive package that they've built. 35% of people are looking for friends and 27% are looking for just a safer environment to live in. All of this tells us that community matters, right? And who your community is and who you are. It can be sold and it can be a place and something that's very attractive to these folks that are looking for somewhere different. So I mentioned some of our clients and folks that we've worked with. Purdue University is one that we've had, that we started late last spring. I'll let Kyle kind of take over from here, since Kyle is typically the individual who works with the communities to design and build these. And he can tell you a little bit about some of the use cases and communities we've worked with and some of the best practices as far as designing an incentive is concerned.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, we'll start by just talking through a few examples, communities we work with, and what we're seeing. Starting with the Purdue Research Foundation, they've developed this Discovery Park District, which is right there next to the Purdue campus. And the idea here for them is, can we attract people that are basically tech entrepreneurs to sort of like build out a community that feeds off the energy of what we have going on the Purdue campus. So the Discovery Park District, there's new housing developments there. There's a really great co-working space they built, but it's sort of like this mini hub of a community that they wanted to start. And so, could they attract people here under this premise of come be a part of this thing that we're building for like-minded people like yourself? So their goal at the outset was to recruit 5 remote workers to live and work in the Discovery Park District. So far, they've had 348 applicants, 20 people committed to moving there. So pretty big jump from what they were originally planning. I know a couple people have already actually made the move and are the first people on site there. Interestingly, only 50% actually qualified to receive the incentive, but were open to moving anyway. It was just the sell of like being a part of this community. You see the average salary there, almost 100,000, and as well, Purdue affiliated 15%. That was a really great angle for them of like, come back home to Indiana. People that had graduated from Purdue moved away, and now the opportunity to come back and be a part of something they were building.
Can I chime in real quick here, Kyle?
Yeah.
So I want to kind of fixate on that 15% number really quickly. We talked about do incentives drive incremental movers, right? That's kind of the theme here. The incentive that Purdue offered was $5,000 stipend, but the stipend was just a part of it. We also incorporated into the incentive access to amenities that the university and the community could provide. So that meant a free membership to the Chamber of Commerce, discounted access to the co-working space, access to university speakers. How universities oftentimes have speakers come in different series. They got free access to those. They got free access to the university library, access to some workout facilities, in addition to, there were a discount on Purdue Global, which is their online school. So a variety of things that the university and that the community could provide. The fact that we put together not just here we'll cut you a check, but an actual program attracted so many individuals who had never even been to West Lafayette, right? So it says Purdue affiliated 15%. Of the Purdue affiliated people, they weren't even contemplating moving to West Lafayette. They just came across this program. The folks that weren't affiliated had never even set foot in West Lafayette. So yes, we drove incremental movers, not just with a $5,000 check, but with a program that actually gave them a community to belong to and an experience that a quality of life that they were looking for. So of the 20, 11 have already moved, and the others are literally, they have leases signed and should be moving in the first part of the year next year. And like Kyle said, our goal was 5. We got 4 times that. So Purdue is doubling down, and we're growing the program next year, along with West Lafayette. And our target is 100 new workers into West Lafayette and the research park.
Yeah, so a great example of just thinking about the target persona of who they wanted to attract, and then building the community and the incentive to bring those people there.
Yeah, and I'll also say the fact that only 50% received a $5,000 check, but they had access to the programming, just shows how you don't necessarily need cash to attract people. It's all about building an experience.
Yeah. Tulsa, another community we work with, and they have a really great program, Tulsa Remote. Tulsa, just like a lot of Midwestern cities, facing challenges related to population growth, and specifically kind of building out the tech community that started to blossom in that area. And so they kind of took an interesting approach with this. Not only are they recruiting remote workers, they've got a $10,000 cash incentive along with a number of other perks, but it's really about getting involved in the tech community there. And they're thinking about this of not just attracting remote workers that stay remote, but attracting remote workers that eventually become grafted into the tech scene there in Tulsa. So sort of a two-pronged approach there of thinking about like kind of organically creating their own pipeline of Tulsa specific tech company talent, starting with bringing the remote workers in. So they've had a hugely successful year in 2021, 62 million in new local earnings, almost a $14 boost in new local labor income for every dollar that they've spent towards relocating a remote worker, and that's all that's involved in the incentive package they put together, and then marketing that program. And then one new job created in Tulsa for every two remote workers who relocated. We talk about the economic impact that a remote worker can make in coming to a new city, but the more people you're driving in, the more need there is in the community to kind of support that population. And they've created a really great program that is really been taking off. And then finally, want to talk about Topeka. They were an interesting case in that they had discovered that 40% of their workforce with an annual income greater than 40,000 actually lived outside of Shawnee County, which is where Topeka is located. So they've got all these people that live in the surrounding counties that are commuting in to work in Topeka, all making a higher wage living outside the county. So they thought about what was a incentive package that they could put together and attract people to live in Shawnee County. They had a cash incentive. They had a really interesting thing. They did, I think it was $1,000 of Jimmy John sandwiches. They came up with a few different sort of quirky things that were part of that incentive. Their program was focused on recruiting 25 remote workers and 25 employee match hires for jobs in Shawnee County. When we talked with them, they were expecting, they were like in their minds shooting high. They wanted to have a 6x ROI on this program in the first year. They've had almost 12x ROI in this first year, and the average income of the new recruits they're bringing in is 85,000. So again, something they kind of started off with, put together a really unique incentive package, knew exactly what the problem was that they were trying to solve, and they've seen a lot of success so far. So all of this kind of leads into this concept of like, so what does it look like for my community to put together an incentive that's going to be attractive for remote workers? And I wanted to start off by talking about a few things that we would recommend not doing. If we go back to a few slides earlier and talking about, 50% of folks said they would, consider the move if given, $10,000 and the community had the amenities that they were looking for. Mike pointed it out then. Don't assume that cash is going to be enough. People aren't going to move somewhere that they don't want to be just for $5,000 or $10,000 cash. They really want to be somewhere that they feel like they belong. They want to be somewhere that they feel like they're going to come into a community. And you can look back to all the data that was shared around why these people are ultimately making these moves, and it comes back to quality of life, schools, safety, feeling like you're a part of a community, making new friends. So, cash is great, but don't assume that that's going to be the piece that gets the job done. We've seen programs that'll offer parcels of land. Maybe they're trying to get rid of some undesirable land by offering it up of like, hey, come build a home on this. Again, don't assume that, free land, even if it's bad land, is going to be something that's going to cause somebody to be like, sure, I'll take you up on that. Same goes for a commitment to build a new home. We've seen that. It's a part of a few incentive packages that it adds a whole new element of lift for somebody to get over of like, now not only am I thinking about kind of uprooting my life, but now I'm in the process of building home. It's just something that we've not seen be successful. And finally, don't underestimate the value of process in order to understand the incremental value. If you really want to understand the ROI of these programs, how successful they really are, not only do you need to have the incentive in place, but you need to have a process. So when people start to raise their hands and say, yeah, I'd be interested in that. Like, what are the steps that are involved after somebody raises their hand to ultimately bringing them to your community to live there? There's a lot of different checkpoints. It's a whole other webinar that we may do about like, what does it look like to build a process after you have a great incentive? But it's just so vitally important to understanding the success, what's working and what's not working. So what should you do? We've said it, we can say it 100 times. Don't just cut a check. Start thinking about the value prop of your community. And that's all about leveraging the assets and amenities that you have within your community. One of the things that we talk about a lot at MakeMyMove, we've say it aloud in the office. We've talked about painting it on the walls, hope and pride. The people that love living in your community, they've spent their whole lives there. They have a sense of pride. They have a sense of hope and what the community has been, what it's going to be. how can you sell that to somebody that doesn't know anything about your city or your community? That's really the key. And we're going to talk about, Mike mentioned Greensburg. I'm going to talk about them here in just a few minutes of how they really tapped into that. Um, Once you kind of figure out what that is, creating on ramps for somebody to like not only see that as something on paper of like, oh, that's interesting, but how can you actually include as a part of your incentive getting people connected into the community? It's going to make the move so much stickier. It's the difference between somebody moving and staying for a year or two, or somebody moving and actually becoming a part of the community, feeling like they're at home, and staying for 6, 7, 10, 20 years. Um, and finally, thinking about what makes your community different or special, tapping into your existing community evangelists that can kind of bring that story to life. We all know that in every town and every city, there's people that are really vocal, really hopeful, really passionate about where they live. What is it that you can take from those folks to incorporate and sort of use them as the voice box for selling your community? So we've got a slide here of a ton of different examples to just kind of a launching off point of things you can think about. I want to focus on the column on the right side, which is a little bit more of the, outside of, again, we can talk about the cash and the moving expenses and all of that. But what are the actual community elements that kind of stand out and set your community apart? And you'll see a number of different things there. We talked about the Jimmy John sandwiches, coffee shop, gym memberships, co-working spaces. You'll notice the last one on there, grandparents on demand. This one is our favorite, and it's the one that we talk about the most. And it's a great lead in to talking about Greensburg, which we've hinted at a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of jump into their story. So Greensburg, they're a small city here in Indiana. They're about an hour away from Indianapolis, an hour away from Cincinnati, I think hour and a half, 2 hours north of Louisville. And when we first met with them and started talking with them about like, hey, what is it, that's so great about Greensburg? And it's like, well, hey, we're an hour away from these other places that have all this stuff to do. Um, you know, that's nice, but that may not really be something that's going to get somebody to say, "Oh, I can't wait to go live there." So we asked them to really think hard about who they are, what it is that makes Greensburg special, and they came
Can I
up with a
chime in? Can I interrupt
yeah.
real quick, Cal? I think what I see that is that was that's the pitch that they make to companies,
Mhm.
right? They're so used to selling to companies and employers, trying to attract them to Greensburg. Their pitch is, hey, we're an hour from Indianapolis, an hour from Cincinnati, and an hour and a half from Louisville, and that's a great pitch for companies that are manufacturers, that are concerned about logistics and access to workforce, real estate. But to people who are looking for a community to be a part of, that is not how you sell. So Kyle will talk a little bit about the exercise, but we went through an exercise that kind of captured the community and the assets of the community, and it worked. So go ahead, Cal. Sorry to interrupt there.
No, absolutely. One of the things that they sort of discovered was this idea of family and belonging. And this came from, again, people that have like lived their whole lives in Greensburg and understand the value of being a part of that community. Some of the things that were a part of their incentive package included, a annual membership to the Treehouse Players, which is the local theater group there. They had a co-working space that they offered a free membership for. There was a coffee house membership, but the most fascinating thing that came out of this, and this is the thing that really sold it, was this idea of grandparents on demand. So there's a woman on the council there. We call her Grammy Tammy, and she has lived there her whole life. Her husband's a school bus driver, and they sort of view themselves as like grandparents in the community. There's all kinds of families that they have kind of like stood in for as grandparents, aside from their own grandchildren. But they kind of thought about like, what would it look like if people were to move here and we were to offer them ourselves? We'll watch your kids on a date night. We'll go to school on Grandparents' Day to stand in, as your kids' grandparents. We'll be there to help out. One of the biggest things when somebody's moving to a new city, a new community, is like being the new person. You don't know anybody. Maybe you've moved away from family. This was a way to like immediately connect people with the heartbeat of this community. And this really took off. They went into this with a goal of recruiting 5 remote workers to live and work in Greensburg. within the first 2 weeks, they had 1,800 people that applied for this program to move to Greensburg. The story took off. It got a ton of national press, NPR, Business Insider, Fox and Friends, because and Grammy Tammy became the face of it. You just see her, you hear her talk, and you're like, oh, this is exactly the kind of person that I would want to move here for. This is you just get a sense for who the people of Greensburg are, and what they offer about themselves to each other. And it was such an attractive thing, I think, for people to think about, like, wow, what a great place to think about raising my family, and moving my family to. So they've already had, we're 6 weeks into this. One person has moved. They're going to easily hit that 5 remote workers mark, and we're already thinking about, like, what does the future look like to expand this program. But it's been a perfect case study for a community, like really looking inward, and thinking amongst themselves, like, who are we and why would somebody want to live here?
And it's a
Mike,
small, it's a small 8,000 person community. You know, I mean, it to them, you know, just the five, the mayor and the economic developer were like, man, if we get 5, that would be great. You know, it's exceeding all of their expectations. And they're also, you know, one of the other things that they mentioned is in some of these small towns, there's a leadership vacuum to some degree, right? Like the folks that used to be part of the Rotary Club or the Optimist Club and would be on the city council and on the non-for-profit boards. They don't have that many people, and these workers that they're recruiting they see them as an opportunity to help fill some of that vacuum, because these are the type of people that they're getting. That's it. I'm done. Done with my chipping. Go ahead, Kyle.
Well, that takes us to the Q&A portion. Mike and I have talked a lot. We would love to hear from you all if you have questions. Again, you'll notice there's a Q&A button where you can actually submit your questions. We're happy to take them there, and talk through those. We'll give you a couple minutes to start submitting. Mike, while we wait on that, I wanted to ask you, I know you were really involved with the Greensburg process. What was the tipping point where it changed from their state of mind thinking about, you talked about, they were thinking about attracting companies to attracting people. What was the moment that the light bulb kind of went off in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, so part of our process is sitting down with the leaders in the community, and you talked about this, tapping into the evangelists, and one of the things that we spoke to the mayor about is this fact. Okay, you have people in Greensburg that love Greensburg, who have stories and experiences that they would love to tell to who's interested in moving to Greensburg, right? And he's like, yeah, I could tick off 10 right now, and we're like, yeah, exactly. Okay, so one, how do you deploy those people? You have no idea how to extract those stories and experiences and put them in front of an audience of relevant, interested people. And so the first step was just going, okay, who are the people? Let's get them involved. Let's talk to them. And so it was really this activity, this brainstorming activity within the community to come up with these ideas. And we had this, this whiteboard that was just packed and filled with ideas from different folks around the community. And we winnowed it down. And lo and behold, it ended up working. So not only does this afford an opportunity for a community to start marketing itself, but it also gives a community a way to kind of take their identity and turn it into something tangible, right? And turn it into something that's marketable and sellable. So that process they loved it. It was phenomenal. We continue, it's not going to be static, right? We're going to continue to iterate and come up with new ideas for the incentive for them.
We got a couple questions here, Mike. First one from Todd. Any examples of providing the incentive to local recruiters versus the actual movers?
In other words, like paying a local recruiter to get someone from out of state hired. I don't have any examples of that. I do have examples of employers that are offering incentives to identify workers that live outside of the market, right? I know a lot of hospitals are doing that. I know a lot of manufacturers are doing that. Some of them are more successful than others. The one thing I will say is it's a lot harder to move people that are tethered to a job. Number one, and if it's a job that's kind of like a factory job, something where you're going to make $20 to $30 an hour, those are available everywhere. So that job is that job paired with the incentive is not necessarily going to cause someone to uproot themselves and relocate to a new community. But I don't have any examples of recruiters directly being incentivized to attract talent from outside of their market.
All right, we got a question from Jonathan. Is there a sweet spot in terms of community size or metro area?
No. I mean, Greensburg is 8,000 people. West Lafayette is almost 100,000 people. Tulsa is 500,000 people. So no, I don't think there's a sweet spot. I think that what we've learned over our work is that communities aren't really good at marketing themselves. So truly understanding how to market themselves is not a muscle that and when I say market themselves, I mean market themselves to people, not to companies. A lot of the economic development folks are very familiar with how to market to companies. I'm talking about retail economic development, where you're actually marketing to people to turn them into new residents. So it's a new muscle that they're starting to develop. Then the second piece is the recruiting piece, right? So this is not a branding activity. Branding, making people familiar with your community and who you are that's great, and it's necessary, but this is direct conversion marketing, right? So you have to have a process when someone raises their hand and says, I'm interested in your community and learning more about it and potentially moving there. You have to have a trackable, manageable process that delivers a great experience to those individuals. If they send you, if they raise their hand, whether it's through an email or a phone call or filling out an application, and you don't call them or reach out to them for 3 weeks, they are not going to move to your community. So you have to be sure to have a process to recruit these people. And I think that's another muscle that communities really are unfamiliar with. And I see it because they don't invest in it. There are very few communities that actually pay people to recruit people to the community, right? There's a reason why companies hire recruiters to recruit them to the companies. It's because you have to have that managed process to land those individuals. Communities have to do the same thing. They have to have a process to land those individuals. One of the reasons why Tulsa is so successful is because they have invested in a set of recruiters who, when someone raises their hand and says, I'm interested in moving to Tulsa, they work a process with them. Sorry, I think I'm saying the same thing over and over again. But it's a really important point.
We'll do one last call for any questions here. Give you just a couple minutes if there's anything else out there that someone would like to ask. And yeah, I think that Mike, going back to the process thing, I mean, there's a reason to hammer that home. Like I said, it's a whole other conversation to have. Like once you even, come up with like, is this something we want to do? What is the right incentive to attract people without the process in place? It's it's going to be really tough, and you're not going to, the best incentive in the world without a process to get people moved in is, kind of meaningless in a way, I guess.
Yeah, and one other point to that is, we're very focused on measuring return on investment, right? We understand that incentives cost money, doing the work costs money, but when you have a process in place, you can actually measure how much value you're creating for the community at a very precise level, right? These individuals that you recruit, you have clear line of sight to who they are, how much money they make, what their family composition is, where they live, when they move, et cetera, et cetera. So it helps you justify to your constituents and stakeholders whether or not you're delivering on the investment that you're making to do this.
All right. Well, I think that is going to do it for us today. Again, we really appreciate everybody taking time to join us today and be a part of this conversation. Obviously, I've got Mike's info here. Can reach out to him with any questions you think of after the fact. Mike, any parting words that you'd like to give for us today?
Nothing. I would say, kind of the punchline here is, do incentives really work? I think incentives work, but don't just narrow the way you think of incentives as a dollar, or $10 or dollar amount, right? Like an incentive could be being part of a program that helps you become part of a community. Incentives do work because it is, if you make it the value proposition and the quality of life and the experience you're going to get in the community, you'll get people that are interested and you'll be able to land them.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you to everybody for joining us today.
Thanks,
Reach
everybody.
out if you have any questions, but otherwise, thank you all for your time.